There was one thing that really got me. I mean, I did the typical thing. I think I entered 12 or 14 sprint races in year one. Mad. I was always completely knackered. But I refer back to, I was fortunate enough to qualify outright and then a couple of roll down places. So I managed to start visiting. And I also got asked by Mark McCormack on one of their global promotional things to come and race at the inaugural race in Abu Dhabi. And I had a fantastic time racing in some wonderful locations with some marvellous races.
And that was the voice of today's guest, Paul Gardner. And we dive into Paul's background from growing up as a kid, his sporting history, a terrible accident he had when he was younger, and how he came out the other side to become a GB age group triathlete and a highly qualified triathlon coach. So that's coming up. Welcome back to the Age Group Multisport podcast YouTube channel with me, Richard. I hope you're all well, and thank you once again for joining us and giving our little podcast a listen. What's been happening over the last fortnight? Well, it's been more rehab for me on the calf since I missed the race up at East Fortune, and just did a track session on it for the first time on Saturday, and it was only a run walk, but it felt okay. And since then I have done another high rock session, and again a little bit of running in there between each stations, and that felt pretty good as well. So we're just taking it slowly and rehabbing and strengthening those muscles that always seem to pop, especially when you're a 58-year-old like I am. Been watching a lot of cycling as well over the last few weeks. The one-day classics are almost finished now. I think we've got Paris-Roubaix on Sunday, and then I think that's pretty much them done. And we've had a few weekday races as well, which I've tried to watch as much as possible. And if not, because I'm back working, then we usually catch up on YouTube. Not really been many triathlons on that I've seen. Although there was the 70.3 over in the States that Christian Blumenthal won for the men, and I really can't remember who won for the ladies, but I do remember it was a pretty good race from, I think it was Taylor Knibb won for the ladies. It was, yeah. It was a pretty good race all round, actually. And the usual suspects were incredible. And I enjoyed that one, I've got to say. I've only got one podcast recommendation today, and that is the Purple Patch podcast, and he was talking about myths that may be holding you back in triathlon. So that might be worth a listen, and you'll find that on any of your streaming platforms. So it's time for the main event. Hope you enjoy Paul's journey. Really knowledgeable guy, and really enjoyed chatting to him. So we shall see you on the other side.
I'm Paul Gardner. I am many things, but for the purposes of this, I'm a level 2 triathlon coach, I would guess. I've run my own training and coaching business for the past 10, 15 years. I'm an ex-age grouper who fell into triathlon as a result of a really bad car accident. And getting into triathlon was my means of bucking myself up and getting out of a pretty miserable part of my life when I couldn't move very much and couldn't do very much. So really, I would say triathlon for me is a bit more than a sport. I'm hopefully giving back a lot now, but it actually changed my life and what I do in the direction of my life. So I have a lot to thank for the sport. And I've worked in various areas on committees as a coach, committee member, and on the board of Triathlon England. And as an official, so I probably have a fairly rounded view of the whole sport of triathlon and the people that compete within.
Cool. I'm sure we'll get into detail of all that. So what did you do as a child growing up sporting wise before you got into triathlon? And we will go into that accident as well because that was like it sounded absolutely horrific. But it's
Yeah.
amazing what you can come out of, isn't it? And yeah, so what did you do as a kid?
With the right people, it absolutely is. It really teaches you who your friends really are. As a kid, I went to Winslow Grammar, which is kind of, as anyone knows, Manchester United, Manchester City is the preferred place for them all to live around there. So at school, I played rugby and we were pretty good. We were unbeaten for 2 years. Our school basketball team, and that's the sport I really took up. Our starting five was the England team starting five. So we swept pretty much all in front of us. And that was a really good learning. And where I first learned the value of really good coaching, we used to play 3 or 4 times a week. We had American coaches. We embraced all the latest stuff with, glasses that were blacked out so we couldn't look at the ball, all kinds of stuff, really. So I picked up a bit of tennis back in the day. So a bit of an all-rounder. I wasn't the brightest person at school. I preferred to play sport. And that's it, really. On the back of that, I started playing basketball for a franchise that was bought by Manchester United. So that was quite interesting. I wasn't really good enough to compete or tall enough to compete in the National League. So back at the end of, I don't know, the 1970s, I left and came up to Hertfordshire.
Right. So how tall are you then, Paul, if you don't mind me asking?
Depends which leg I stand on. On one leg I'm 6 foot, on the other leg I'm 5'11".
Right.
Because aforementioned accident.
Yeah, sure. From reading your email, you had the accident while you were doing basketball, is that right?
Yeah, we were playing in the Central League, Bedford, and I was playing for Hempstead franchise. And we finished the match, and I was driving back, and unfortunately ran into 2 joyriders, which, if people don't know what that means, it's people that steal cars for fun. You probably see them on all the police pursuit programs on TV. And it was late at night, and I just happened to be in the wrong time at the wrong place.
Yeah. And you said in your email they were doing some speed. Just go through, I mean,
Sure.
what happened to you, and then,
Yeah.
how you come out the other side, and like you mentioned, triathlon helped you do that.
Yeah. So I was traveling back. We'd left the place. I'd stayed for a drink, non-alcoholic, afterwards. And on the way home, if anyone knows around the Bedford area, there's these typical 3 lanes where the middle lane is used as an overtaking lane. And I saw a car coming towards me. It turned out to be a Volvo towing a small caravan. And it was being overtaken by a fast-moving car. Bear in mind, this is at night, so all you could judge was lights and dim shapes. I moved over slightly, but what I wasn't expecting was a second joyrider. So there were 3 cars across the road coming towards me. And the guy that hit me was doing over 100, the police said. I didn't see him coming and was doing 50 the other way. So it was a pretty high-speed contact. Sadly, he was decapitated. I did 4 somersaults into a field where pretty much everything in my body was wrecked. So both ankles, both knees, both legs, my left arm. The deceleration was so great that my intestines detached, and 4 days later I got gangrene. Some of those had to be removed. I technically broke my neck and my back, although thank gosh not severely. So that was a pretty horrendous night. And I also managed to get the steering column pierced into my body. So I wasn't in a particularly good way. And you would think that couldn't get worse, but it turned out that I felt people brushing my hair and kind of touching my wrist and putting a hand on my heart. And I thought it was the doctors. And what it turned out was another set of joyriders first on the scene. And instead of helping me, they actually took my watch, my credit card, and my cross at the time. And when I came round 5 or 6 weeks later out of my induced coma, they'd spent £7,000 in Ratners, the jewellers that everyone knows about. And you could buy a Ratner shop for that money in those days. So, it was a pretty horrific time. And the only thing worse, I suppose, it was a year later, I went back to the fire brigade to thank them. And they thought the other team in the fire brigade had amputated my leg. As it turned out, the other team had just pulled my leg out of the car and my calf had been removed, but that was sewn on as part of the 27 hours of surgery afterwards. So that was, for a sporting person, was a pretty hard stop for me. And it left me in a kind of all kinds of state because, it took me a long time to recover. I had to learn to play tennis again in a wheelchair. I had to move out of the wheelchair. But it gave me some really good insight into how much a driver sport can be if you want to do something. And I ticked along, I suppose, generally feeling a little bit sorry for myself, probably using my injuries and the fact that, I couldn't move as fast as I used to do as a bit of an excuse, really, until I decided after my mum died of cancer to go and do a triathlon in London. And that started my triathlon journey off and really changed my whole view on life.
So why did you decide to do triathlon particularly?
Because I couldn't swim. I'd lost a friend earlier in my primary school days over a weir, so never really liked swimming. I was okay on a bike, but didn't really own one. And running, I thought, was fairly easy. Back in the day, I used to be a sprinter at school and a pretty swift one as well. So I thought, how hard could it be? And I turned up for the super sprint into the murky kind of Docklands area. I think I came 12th, but it was, of course, all the novices and the old people and the larger people as well. So I thought I'd found my sport. So on the back of that, I entered Cowman up at Edmonton, Milton Keynes. About 4 weeks later, which was a European qualifier, I came playing last out of everybody. In fact, they were taking down the swim gantry as I left because I got lost, had a panic attack. Everything you can do wrong for that race, I did. My bike was okay because I'm pretty strong with my athletic background. My run is diabolical because I have a slight impediment in that kind of area. So at the end of that, I thought the best way for me to get better was to join a club. And then very quickly after that, I thought, well, I'm a coach in other sports. Why don't I become a coach in triathlon? Because it will probably be the fastest way for me to learn to get better. And there were some really good athletes and coaches around in those days. And, I was traveling a lot with my work. So I had a session with Jerry Rodriguez from Town 42. In my opinion, one of the world's best swimmers, Dan Bullock, who many of your listeners will know. The Fish, if you remember him, who was 12th out of the water, Richard Stannard. So I spent a lot of time and effort and costly money trying to get lessons from the best to improve my basic skills and everything I did. And then my coaching kind of took off from there, really. Once I got my level 1 and then level 2 and then diploma, I was working as Hillingdon Triathletes, one of the biggest triathlon clubs in the UK. I was working as their technical swim coach. I did some work for another couple of tri clubs. We helped establish Skegness. And it just was a really natural, easy thing to do. By definition, I'd kind of stopped permanent working then. I'd had a bit of fortune with a business that I'd been connected with. So it allowed me time to spend learning about myself, learning about the sport. And when I went onto the board of Triathlon England, it gave me access to some of the elite performance programs. And before every board meeting or wherever I could, I used to hang out and just see what was being done amongst some of our best athletes. And, I'm a sponge. If I'm going to learn something that's going to benefit me and benefit people I coach, I'm going to take it and use it. And it was a very, very formative time. And I'm very, very grateful for it. And as I said, none of this would probably have happened had the accident not happened. So in a funny way, I'm grateful that it did.
Yeah. So how did you know about triathlon in the first place? Because it obviously back then it wasn't as big as it is now.
No, I saw it on whatever the local London South TV was. And they were covering it because it was being held in London. It was a big event. And I saw it on that and just thought, I'll enter it. And it was the usual, I'll get sponsored to go and do it for charity. So off I went. So it was easy as that. And
right.
As most people on here will know, either becomes a lifestyle or you learn to love it. And for me, it was both of those. Although I was terrified at the swim, I'd never swam more than 400 meters before. And much the same way as my first world championship. In my naivety, I thought the swim was 400, not 750. And I'm one of these people who would probably just do the bare minimum and rely on a modicum of talent to do the rest. And I was really caught out, swimming through that dark tunnel in Hamburg with people screaming your name and stuff, knowing full well I was out of gas on the swim and I had a really tricky bike and run to do was interesting to say the least.
Sure. So how did it develop then after your first triathlon?
There was one thing that really, really got me. I mean, I did the typical thing. I think I entered 12 or 14 sprint races in year one. Mad. I was always completely knackered. But I refer back to, I was fortunate enough to qualify outright and then a couple of roll down places. So I managed to start visiting. And I also got asked by Mark McCormack on one of their global promotional things to come and race at the inaugural race in Abu Dhabi. And I had a fantastic time racing in some wonderful locations with some marvelous races. And it became very clear to me I was never going to set the world on fire. I think my best I've ever done is like 24th at a Worlds. But watching some of these guys race and some of the girls race too, absolutely phenomenal. But I remember Hamburg in particular teaching me a big lesson, because at the time there was a category called les autres, which were for people that didn't have defined problems. And back in the day, I suppose, when I had a bit of an ego, I thought maybe if I raced les autres, I would come higher up the results than constantly falling apart on the run. In my fastest ever run for 5Ks, 24 minutes, 23:15, that was never going to set the world on fire. And I remember being asked to help out a German elite who only had one leg. And as the race progressed, he came back from the swim and he was in second or third. We didn't have time to put his cycle leg on, and he went and did a 40K course with one leg. And he came back and I was thinking, how on earth can he still be in contention pedaling with one leg? And then he went and did the run, and I'm not sure it'd be allowed these days on crutches. We didn't have time to put his run leg on. And I remember thinking after that, maybe I should shut up, stop complaining about my lot, and just get on with racing and accept whatever comes my way. So that whole thing was a real learning curve for me. And it showed me that actually there were people far worse than me who were just getting on with life and doing a damn good job at doing it and enjoying themselves. And bear in mind, I came to triathlon pretty late. It was in my 40s, I suppose.
Right.
So I didn't have any of the kind of the background and stuff in
there. Yeah. So you progressed and you did loads of swims. Did you join a club at that point?
Yes, I looked around. There were a couple of smaller clubs around me, but Hillingdon Triathletes seemed to have it all. They had a coaches program. They had a good committee. They had good facilities. They ran a whole bunch of races, and anyone that knows them around West London will know that Minute Park was a closed bike circuit, so it seems to me a bit of a no-brainer. They also happened to fit in with my tennis schedule, so their long runs on the bikes were on Sundays. So I joined there pretty quickly, and after a year, I joined their coaching staff, and then I spent 7-8 years doing their technical swim lanes. And it's still quite a funny thing. It still makes me smile in triathlon that a lot of people, there's a certain kudos attached to the fast lane, medium lane, and slow lane. And if anybody wants any technical coaching, I used to get approached quietly and be told, can you just come and give me a few pointers? They would never, ever move from the fast lane to what they call the slow lane, where I was teaching the novices coming through and those that were wanting more technical input. And we did very well. Hillingdon Triathletes, I think, has been under some marvellous stewardship from Dave Ward, L and others, and Jackie currently has been Triathlon Club of the Year numerous times. So it was a fantastic environment in which to learn, in which to grow. And, any decent coach will tell you, you learn more from the people you're coaching than you do. And that's something I learned as a tennis coach back in the day. I remember telling a young child to keep an eye on the ball, and they literally did, and the ball hit them in the eye. And it taught me to think, well, how is coaching received? You need to be able to communicate the essentials in the manner that people want to receive them in. And Hillingdon was a fantastic learning ground for that. A whole range of really, really good athletes, all the way down to people that could hardly jog, let alone run. So it was a fairly formative time in my kind of triathlon coaching. And I raced for them at the relays. I mean, lots of mistakes being made. Everyone knows what the relays can be in terms of a washing machine. But it was a fantastic 7 or 8 years of consolidation in my kind of limited triathlon life.
Yeah. And was that where you found out about the GB team?
No, I competed for GB before I joined them, really.
Right, okay.
It was a little bit unusual. I mean, if you think about it, my first experience was fantastic, Hamburg. And again, I learned things there. Some guys stopped me at the lights and told me I should be wearing a hat, a race lid, 3 days before the race. And I probably gave him an answer that it's not worth repeating here. And he said, I am the referee and you need to read the rules. And it was like, oh my gosh, that was a lucky escape. And then we did Israel, and that was a weird thing. And those of us who were old enough to be there will remember the mad thing of machine guns coming out on the carousel for the luggage, all the talcum powder and all the potions being tipped out on the floor. It was such a weird place. And we were told that if we were to go off or deviate off the bike route, we would likely be blown up by the landmines. So it was really strange. We also spent time over at Vancouver at the Worlds, the home of International Triathlon, which was the poorest event ever. It almost snowed. It certainly sleeted. Security wasn't there. They had to abandon the women's elite juniors. The swim was curtailed. Anything that could go wrong at that championship seemed to happen. So, it was an interesting time in triathlon's history where it perhaps wasn't as slick as it is now. But as I said, it was a real learning curve. And if you could adjust and achieve in those environments, you could do it anywhere, really.
Yeah. So how did you find out about age group?
Pretty much just looking online. I mean, I think Tri247 was around at the time. As I said, Hillingdon had lots of really, really good age groupers. And of course, in our annual Christmas awards at Hillingdon, you would hear all the various stories of people traveling without bike wheels and wearing their kit inside out and stuff. And it's very hard to remain uninterested when people around you are so enthusiastic about taking their abilities to the best they can do. And we had all the debates around, should age group be just a lot more selective and just have, 2 or 3 top people? Or in my opinion, should it be a lot more open? And if you were good enough to qualify and represent and be proud to put on the kit, then you absolutely should be. And that's a view I still take these days, even though some of the hardliners think it should be a lot more select.
Yeah. I mean, we've had that discussion on this podcast previously about what people think of it, and the naysayers are always dissing the people that have actually put the effort in to get there. Because I believe that I'm a big advocate for it, because I do this podcast, I speak to loads of age groupers and listen to loads of stories, and they're all inspiring. A lot of them have come from like nothing, couldn't swim. I mean, I had a lady on, as the podcast just gone out on Wednesday, Alison, and
I saw it.
She didn't start till 40, and she had a massive phobia about swimming, and then she goes and does an Ironman, and it's like, and she represents GB in her age group, and that is worthy. I don't care what your argument is about the elite or racing and the best aren't there. Everybody who puts that jersey on has put the effort in and got themselves to a certain level, because you've still got to get to a level to be able to do it. Despite what races and being tactical, you've still got to get there. So
I couldn't agree more. It's relative. If you put the work in and you're proud of what you do, it'll be quite challenging here. What right has anybody else got to disrespect what you do? They don't know your journey. Yeah. People watching me kind of limp over the run course and have to stop because I get too hot because I have a problem shedding stuff. I remember doing Dorney once and thinking it was a hot day. I've had enough of this, and I decided to do it in blocks. So I would go as fast as I could for 800 meters, walk 200. And what I hadn't realized, of course, is you sprint past really good athletes and then you stop. And then the first time they ask, "Are you okay?" you say yes. And then a few minutes later, you're sprinting past them again. After the second or third time that's happened, they are less than, they're less than polite in their request for if you are okay, and more along the lines of what do you think you're doing. So it does take all sorts. And, I really appreciate that. I think triathlon's a richer place for it. I still remember going as a guest to the Commonwealth Games, and watching one triathlete. I think the rule there is once you've gone past twice, once you get lapped, that was it.
Right.
And it was so embarrassing with the cameras on. They had a whole bunch of stewards tackle the guy on the other side of the main course to make him stop, because he was from Africa. He must have gut, but he was so far behind everybody. He probably wasn't even up to age group level, and we're talking the Commonwealth Games. And they had to literally pin him to the ground politely to stop him coming around through transition again. And I remember thinking, when he didn't appear again, the boos that rang out from amongst the crowd that was watching. And that kind of, I suppose, typifies my view on that stuff, that if he's the best of what he did in his country, I cannot imagine that they're not quite the shame, but the anger he must have had at being deemed not good enough and ruining his day. I understand the rules are the rules, but you know what? I kind of wished he'd got on with it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, despite why do you have to pull them out? Let them finish. They've put the effort in, and if that's the best that they've got, well, that's the best that they've got. They've hit the criteria, and I know now there's certain time limits that you've got to meet in other sports like athletics, and that sort of curtails that to a degree. And yeah, if you get lapped on certain bike races, they pull you out, and triathlon as well. So it's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah, I had a real eye-opening moment, because when you're in age group, you expect to kind of turn up at most races, and you're normally on page one. And if you're really good, you're normally in the first 10 results from the timing chip or the timing chip results. And I remember I remember trying to turn up for the two. Do you remember the 2012 World Champs were in London?
Yeah.
And I remember going along to a couple of the qualifiers, and I did my race. I came into the tent and I said, "Oh, can I look at the results sheet?" And the guy handed me this sheet, and I looked down at it and I said, "Oh, my chip must have come off, or it's not working. I'm not on the first 20 or 30." And he went, "No," tapped away in his computer and said, "No, you are on there." I was on page 3, and I was like, "This is bonkers," because no matter how good you think you are, it's like tennis. The second you start thinking you're good, there's another 1,000 people that will come and beat you love and low. And the same in triathlon. And what happened that year, of course, people didn't have to go to Australia. They didn't have to spend fortunes on air tickets and special kit and getting their bikes across. So every fell runner, decent track runner, decent biker who had a bit of a run and swimming in turned up. And of course, what that meant was, unless you were exceptionally good, and I can think of some of the guys like Gary and Michael who still were coming in the top 5 or 10, there was a whole range of people. We looked at the sheet saying, "Who are these people? We've never seen them race before." And of course, they just came out of the woodwork for London because it was a chance to star in front of their families in a relatively local event in a world championship. And you know what? I didn't qualify that year, and I was bitter because I really wanted to. And in the end, I did the main public race. And the speed of the people competing that year, I think, especially the Australians and New Zealanders that come across, was amazingly quick. I would have probably come last in that had I qualified. Yeah. Thank God I didn't.
Small mercies, eh? So from doing your qualification and actually racing for GB several occasions,
yeah.
How did you wrap that up then? Because how did you sort of come out of the racing side of it and start your coaching business? What happened there?
Well, I was doing both, really. I guess it's an expression vicariously, isn't it? Look, so I've had athletes and they've worked super hard. So I've been so fortunate to be around, people like Ali's coach, watching them do the stuff. I watched Ali prepare for Abu Dhabi in the water. Excuse me. And looking at some of the stuff they do and having access to some of the programs. So I'm a member of probably like 4 or 5 global coach guys that run their stuff pretty well. Some really technical people that I really don't understand after listening to 10 minutes to them. And people like Dirk Friel, who kind of wrote the Power Book and all of Training Peaks. So I'm fortunate enough to have got in with those people. So I learn on a kind of a day-to-day basis. And the whole coaching thing kicked off when, one of my athletes went and won a race outright in Langkawi. I've had juniors come through. I've had people being asked to Super Series. So I knew that I don't cherry pick athletes. They find me and they come to me and we work together for as long as they want to do that. So I thought something I must be doing, and some of the conditions and coaching technologies and things I do must be working for some people that come towards me. And it's really nice just catching up with people and taking calls at stupid o'clock in the morning saying their race is starting and X, Y, and Z. So it wasn't really a conscious decision to stop racing. I had a couple of heart issues as well, which meant, I qualified for the UCI World Championships as well, because I was always decent on the bike or in other sports. And I remember going over there thinking, well, I've qualified, I'm going to go. And then my doctor called me and says, you've got to keep your heart rate under 125 amongst the world's best TT races. And, I was that on the start line, let alone anything else. So I guess it just became, I found coaching others almost as much fun as my training. And if I'm brutally frank around it, I never really enjoyed the long endurance stuff. I'm a short course athlete for a reason. I work very well over very short bursts. I've always loved intervals. I've always loved, hard workouts and plyometrics. I'm not one of these people that will go out for an hour and a half run and call it fun. It's just not my style. I've done 70.3. I was lucky enough to be ranked under Ironman's global things, but not my cup of tea. And I had a horrendous injury from a 170.3 in Mallorca, where a famous chairperson from another club turned to wave to some of her supporters and took me straight off over an Armco barrier and down a bank. And I severed all 3 hamstrings and broke one. So that put me out for another year. And it's one of these things you just think, God, heart issues, completely severing my hamstrings. And that was quite funny because I went to London. I saw Faraz Haddad, and I asked him what experience he had and he said he just repaired the current Olympic champion. I won't give his name for privacy, but you can probably guess, with exactly the same injury. So, it is a very small world, and I made that move fairly seamlessly to looking at other people's successes. And success isn't always measured by, how well you do at a world championship or a race. For a lot of people, it's being able to go around a corner and not be worried, or being able to descend properly, or learning a new skill. And, I spent some time at the London School of Running as well with Michael, just looking at how people's biomechanics work, because that's a fascinating thing for me. I have to compensate constantly for different leg lengths and different variations in parts of my body that have healed differently. And it's fascinating being able to apply that to great able-bodied athletes. And I've been fortunate, a couple of years ago in Mallorca, the French and German Paralympic guys were there. It was quite nice to take some of my athletes thought they were better swimmers than perhaps they were, and watch them get hammered by a guy with kind of, partial movement of one leg and no other leg. And you do learn a lot. I learned more on staying there for 3 days working with them than I probably ever have. Just simple basics like, how do you help a blind person? Well, you put a woggle in the pool, and when they hit it, they know it's the end of the pool. I would, stupid as it sounds, would never have thought of that. I'd be shouting or whistling at them. And I had another triathlete, a Swedish guy. He came over to where I live. I'm fortunate to live on a farm, so it's quite quiet. And he's blind. He's got 2% vision. He competes. All he can see when someone overtakes, and you might think it's dangerous, is when that person comes past him and comes in front. His legs are covered in lacerations and bruises from him tripping and falling. His swim, he has to follow someone and hope they're going in a straight line. And again, it just amazes me the types of people that just don't see physical or mental challenges as a disadvantage to doing triathlon. So I love being around these people from all walks of life, and perhaps because I've worked in business, I seem to attract people that are pretty time poor, got lots of family things going on, and want to be the best they can in the limited time they've got. Now, I've always said as an athlete, if you want to go and do 80-20, endurance stroke fast stuff, and you have 20, 30 hours a week, and there are a number of age groupers that have that amount of time per week because their other halves work or support them, whatever it's going to be, then you probably don't need me. If you're a more normal, in inverted commas, athlete, then you probably want to get the best of what you've got. And I kind of advocate the Norwegian way of training. So we find that works pretty well. And as I said, my athletes over the years have had some fantastic results. So I'm really pleased with the way that goes.
Yeah, cool. I mean, that's for me to hear a coach say that he likes the short, sprinty stuff. That's quite refreshing, because everything seems to be middle distance and long distance these days. You look on the YouTube, or you look, on all these forums and platforms, it's all about the longer distance. And I don't know, it's more romantic, I suppose, having the Ironman tattoo on your leg. And I'm like you, it's not for me. I'm not built that way. I can't tolerate like long efforts. I'm the short, sharp, fast sort of racing. But there isn't many of us about advocating for that distance. I've looked on YouTube for channels and things, and it's like Ironman 70.3, 70, and it's like, oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you've got a lot of the kind of the shorter course racing, and the I suppose T100 is the bridge between proper long course racing and the shorter stuff. I mean, if you look at Olympic triathlon at the Olympics, that's kind of a spokesperson, kind of bellwether for the sport. But during my time at British Triathlon England, it's a misnomer, and I hope I'm not talking out of turn here to say triathlon's the biggest growing sport in the world. It isn't. For every 5 people that came into triathlon, 4 left, because of exactly what you said. Most of them treat 70.3 as a stepping stone to Ironman. Most people, and let's face it, it is a biased sport in that the US and Ironman are US based. They are spending a fortune on marketing in China because that's a vastly untapped market. And nearly everyone wants to go and do an Ironman because it's a rite of passage. Most people don't really look at sprint and Olympic as a pathway unless you're a member of a club. And then there's a certain amount of pressure to kind of, go and do it properly and do a longer course. As I said, I don't mind long course. It's just that in my particular case, I physically probably couldn't run. I've got fake knee, a smashed knee, plated ankles and a nail from my hip to my knee. So for me, it's just silly to do that. So I wouldn't do it. Having said that, I would say probably 30% of my athletes over the last 4 or 5 years have been Ironmen. The rest have been 70.3 and then age groupers. And then you've got a sprinkling of novices and duathletes, aquabikers and stuff like that coming through. So it's a different kind of pain is all it is. And
Yes.
far beyond me to comment on what people go through and how they think it's going to be. I have absolute admiration for those who've got the time to put the effort in, but I don't anymore. You know, I will probably go back to doing aquabike later this year because it just means I avoid my weakest thing, which is running. So I'm okay on a bike, and as you might imagine, I'm all right on a swim. And that's probably the biggest thing now. Last year we had 12 different countries and continents coming. We're either staying over at the house and learning to swim the way I think we should do it, and not. And, you know, I was fortunate enough to be nominated as Coach of the Year for swim, along with my fellow colleague that I coach with. And that's what I love doing most. The actual watching them generally not whole chunks and seconds of their time in a pool is fantastic. Because I came from that background. You know, I was scared of the water. I'm still not fine. There was a very famous event up north, horrendous, probably about 15 years ago, when everybody on the start line was thinking, are we mad going into the water? There was a 60-foot kind of statue of a couple in the middle of the water, and you couldn't see it with the swell was that big. The guy they sent out in a boat to check had to be rescued himself before we started the race. And I'll give you a clue. Some of the fastest times for the 750 course were 18, 19 minutes. And sometimes I just think, boy, that's horrendous that we actually put ourselves through this stuff for the love of our sport. And when we got back to the transition, it looked like someone had been throwing sand over your bikes. It was an incredible time. But I say it takes all sorts for this sport. I've given up being surprised, and I've given up being depressed at some of the things I see.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you've been in something for so long and you've seen it, I guess, grow over the years, you know, you're not surprised by anything of what's gone on or what's potentially going to happen, you know, because you think you've seen it all and then something else surprises you. Well, not surprises you, but, you know, comes up and you think, yeah, well, it's just part of the journey, isn't it?
I turned up at a race, opened my my bike box and found one wheel in there.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person that's done that.
No, I'm sure you're not. We've all been there and done, you know, ridiculous things. You mentioned the relays up at Nottingham, and we were doing that one year, and I was coming into. They had like the pit where you got off your bike, didn't you? It was all straw bales.
Yeah.
I remember coming in, going over my handlebars.
No, so we have such a lot in common because it's the same thing. I trained one of the Hillingdon I will spare his blushes. So we've been doing flying dismounts and mounts. And he got it absolutely drilled. I mean, fast, he would come in at 30k, dismount, come in. And I made up some ground. We had a really swift couple of bikers in front of me. I mean, made up ground. And there he was coming in. And you know what it's like as you come around the top of the lake and come in. And I thought, well, great. Well, all week we spent 2 hours this week doing this. So I hurtled in behind him, dismounted. And for some reason, because he hadn't tried it in a race yet, he decided to put both brakes on and come to a complete stop and get off. And of course, I mean, stupid. I wasn't expecting that. Same thing. I went straight over him, over the top, and I went completely over the bales. I don't know where the baton went, and my mates are looking at me going, "And you're a coach?" And it was like, oh, we had a interesting conversation after that. I mean, I've got to say it was quite funny, but he said I didn't feel quite confident in doing it here. But what are the chances of me overtaking someone and bashing into them and having an accident like that? It was so bad I couldn't do the run afterwards. I landed so badly. But you're right. This sounds like we've had the same kind of experiences over the same kind of...
Yeah, cool. So if you just want to go into a little bit about what you're doing these days and, you know,
sure.
your coaching and your setup. And I mean, you sent me that email, which was great. And I've looked on your YouTube channel and some of your other bits that you sent through. So just go through and how it all fits in as like holistically what you offer to people.
When I started to get good results, or rather rephrase that, when my athletes start to get good results, I kind of formalized the training stuff. And I don't know, 10 years ago, I had Love Try because I thought that sums up I Love Try. It might be a bit of a naff name. I started to sponsor some athletes. We had a really good training camp based in Colonia San Jordi next to the best swimming pool, the fast swimming pool. I did swim works for open water and contacted some of the lakes around here. So I had a little kind of portfolio of triathlon, multisport, run-based businesses going around. And, with a colleague and best friend, it worked really, really well and spread thinly, but worked well. I've had, 450 odd athletes in the last 10, 15 years, but I like on one-to-one coaching to have no more really than 10 or 12, because I think after that it starts to become a bit cookie cutter and you can't spend the time. I'm not interested in really working with athletes that need every single session itemized and spoken about and agonized over. So as I said, I generally people who are usually fairly senior. So we've had everyone from lawyers and doctors and bankers and nurses for that matter, where their time is really, really important to them come across. And when I first started triathlon, I started looking at training plans, and I was a bit disappointed. They were all fairly cookie cutter, like do this at 6 out of 10 or 4 by 100 at, and there were bits missing. So that was the kind of thing I took into Love Tries Coaching one-to-one. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I realized actually that most plans out there are asymmetric. And what I mean by that is that if you're an age grouper like I was, with a really poor run, a good swim and a good bike, what kind of plan do I get? Do I get one that matches my ability in run and therefore undertrain bike and swim, or do I do the other way around? In which case I'm constantly being asked to run quicker than my abilities. So I thought, if I was coaching somebody, I'd take a personal athlete's view, abilities, aspirations into consideration when I'm putting their plan together. How can I do that in a plan? And then it struck me, actually, all I needed to do really was, all I need to do, it's taken 2 years to do it, was to make sure that each of the abilities are modular. So in the components of a dual sport or triathlon based sport, the swim, bike and run, or combination of. So I split them all out. So Racestronger was born with the kind of sense that why should I have to have a power meter on a bike if I do power during the week and heart rate at the weekend? Why should I have to use threshold pace when actually I love critical swim speed and CSS? So we took the best of what I could do, split it all out into individual modules, and now people can come to Racestronger and choose their ability in each of the disciplines, each of the modules. They can choose what training metric they want to use. They will be presented in front of them. They go along to training peaks to check the abilities, the kind of the age-graded pacings and what you might expect. I mean, you and I both know that as a sprinter or an Olympic triathlete, we're probably going to be looking at 34 minutes for a flat course on a bike. We're probably going to be looking at anything between 19 to 23 minutes for a run. And we're probably looking at anything from, 11 to 13 minutes. That would probably be your average age grouper. So what I did was take what the expectation would be and give people a way of choosing very, very quickly. And there are 250,000 combinations, but you can very quickly pick your ability, pick your metric. It takes about 10 seconds, and then you just download into one plan. The tricky thing for this was making sure that every single individual module worked from the point of view of the transition, the phase, the bricks, the pre-training, the race simulations, the rest weeks, the rest days. And that's what really took all the manipulation and time. So when anyone comes now, they can be fairly guaranteed that they will be training each individual discipline to their intended ability or their current ability. So you should get a training program that means you're not wasting any time or any effort on every workout. And so far, we tested it on 5 or 10 decent athletes. Feedback has been pretty good. So the idea is I'm probably, if I'm brutally honest, a bit late. I think most age groupers are either fairly canny in what they do, or they probably have a coach. I've got no desire to take out, coaches' income from this kind of stuff, but I would stack up most of the plans that we put together. And I've been lucky. I've had access to one professional cycle team's training regime. I've done the same for a triathlon racing team in France. So a lot of the workouts are taken from pro and elite versions. The high performance centres at Bath and Leeds and Loughborough also have some fantastic workouts, and I've just scaled them for the relevant abilities. And by doing that, I mean there is a general consensus amongst how good people have to work at varying levels. So we have experienced athlete, we have age group, we have podium, and you can combine them in any way you want. And so far it seems to be going, but I think it's probably a bit late for this year. So with a bit of luck next year, people will have a choice of spending the same amount on a plan per month with a coach, or maybe going our route. But we shall wait and see. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and it's a very personal journey for me. And if people find it useful, fantastic. And if they don't, well, it will still be there in 5 years' time, I'm hoping.
Yeah. And just tell us how people can get and find that, Paul.
Well, just simply by going to Racestronger.
Yeah.
Once
That's a
you land on
website,
that,
yeah?
yeah, I mean, we have Racestronger / it's killing them, because that's a very famous quote from a very famous triathlete saying, if it's hurting me, it's killing them. And I thought it was quite appropriate. And you land there and it will take you through pretty seamlessly. You press one button and it will then ask for your ability in whichever sport. If you don't want to do one of the sports, let's say you're doing duathlon or you're doing aquabike, you simply just move the little control button across and it will present you with the 2 sports and those abilities. I wrestled for a long time, because over the last 10 years, we've managed to compile some really interesting insight across whole ranges, people's times, what your expectations are, global standards, insight into kind of hot weather racing. And they were all sitting on my computer, not doing very much, and with me sending them out to athletes and when they noted. So I've just made it free for everybody. I copied them all across into Dropbox for those that we couldn't use. And for everybody with Training Peaks, you can download alternate workouts and everything completely free. So there's something like 250 workouts, insight, racing. We have variable race weeks depending on. So I think it's a very full pattern. I think my aim of trying to get something that would be as flexible and as relevant in ability to any athlete of a certain level. These are not for novices and beginners. You need to be doing triathlon for at least probably 2 or 3 years and have a good understanding of your own body and abilities. Then I think it'll work exceptionally well. And as I said, we've made it very easy. One of the things I found on Training Peaks is that they have an algorithm that shows most sold. So people like my pro coach, who's a really good coach, comes first because he spent eons of time and publications and money making sure it's that way. So with our way, it's just my way of taking people off that site and saying, here, you can pick the ideal plan for you in probably less than 10 seconds, and then go see if it's for you. And if it is, download it. So we try to make it as easy as possible. My business experience has been online, has been about optimizing businesses and stuff. So I guess I've managed to bring some of my business background and qualifications into making this work for people on a triathlon basis.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean,
still probably going to put out some free plans, but I thought long and hard about the market, and I thought, given my experience and the exposure I've had to age group and performance programs, my skills lend themselves to doing this for the better athlete, the more experienced athlete. That doesn't preclude, we're not talking about almost impossible targets and reps that are ridiculous, but they will challenge you. And Training Peaks is kind of built in, I call it progression challenge, will ensure that it keeps challenging as you go through. So I have quite a blunt opinion here, is that if you don't have a coach and you have a training plan, you will get better, because it's the structure and the discipline. Part of my qualification with the British Trial is coach mentor, so I coach other coaches. And I have seen, as you might imagine, other athletes come to me with remnants of plans and things they've done. And sometimes I'm totally impressed. Sometimes I look at these and I think, whoa, how did that happen? And, the old school coaching from 15, 20 years ago, which would be pretty much, I was always seeing athletes completely broken. I spoke to one athlete with a coach who shall remain nameless, hadn't had a rest day in over 50 days. And you just think, wow, how can that still be happening in this modern day and age? And if you want to get me started on AI, good luck with that. We've had numerous debates with TriDot. The guy that runs TriDot is a brilliant coach. You probably know him for training certain sweary chef and others, and Billy Monger and people. He's fantastic, and he runs, I think, TriDot in the UK. But I'm not a fan of it. It's a little bit like, be careful how I say this, a little bit like one of the training aids that measures your power when you're running. I still haven't got to the bottom of the question that surely your power running down a hill is more than up. How can it measure wind running through grass when you're on the floor? So I have quite an inquisitive mind based on, I suppose, my background at looking at companies' backgrounds and profit and loss and sales things, and that, I'll always query the most obvious questions. I'm not shy at coming forward on that, and people will tell you that. I mean, they like it or they don't like it. But when I look at AI and I look at TriDot especially, for example, I understand how it's predicated, but it has bias. It's predominantly 85% male. It's the US. It's long sport. There are a number of things in here that I guess it can take into. I mean, AI is absolutely fantastic in terms of what it does to, large scale language models and stuff. But as for keeping it real in a triathlon, I think you can't beat a coach full stop. In my stuff. I think my plans, and I would say this, come a pretty close second. But I think any AI program, when you get someone new coming to it, has the same thing. If you come from an unstructured background and you come to a structured background, be it AI, a coach, or a training plan, you will get better. I'm just not altogether sure that AI should be completely relied upon to build a training plan. It doesn't take in the humanistic aspects of it, how you're feeling on a set day, or sometimes just a cuddle or a kick up the jacksie that you might need to get yourself going. But it's just my view. I'm sure there are many that think AI is the bee's knees.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's each to their own, isn't it? At the end of the day, I don't think there's no one right or wrong answer. I think we're all individual and we all go down our own different routes. And
what do you think of AI? There you go.
Well, I can't remember how many years ago now, but I had the guy from Athletica AI on, Paul Marsden, on the podcast. I don't even know how I come across Paul. So he came on the podcast. Great chat, really nice guy, knew his stuff. He said, try it. I'll give you 12 months. Try it. I've never had like a coach. I'm part of a club. I've got coaches in the club, but never had like a one-to-one coach. I've been in this sport now for 15 years. You pretty much get a sense of what you're doing. I'm not a coach. I have got a sports degree background. That does help at certain times. Anyway, Paul came on, give me this 12-month plan, and I used it. And I thought it was pretty good. It was basic, but it took all the thought process out of it. It wasn't as specific. I mean, back then as well. I mean, things have moved on like 100-fold now. I guess you only put certain details in, so it wasn't as specific as if I was like one-to-one with you, obviously. But for what it did, yeah, it was okay. It did a job at the end of the day, and it was quite impressive for that time. I'm sure they've moved on a lot since then, and it's still going.
It's a bit like the Runner app, isn't it? RUNNA. At the end of the day, if you're wanting to make a lot of money, it's a good thing to have an app that costs £5 a month sold to 10 million people. As simple as that. Yeah. I don't have that approach, that mindset. I don't want to spend all my time on social media promoting stuff. What I want to do is, have 20 or 30 athletes every year thinking what they're doing is really, really good. Yeah. If it's 100 athletes every year, well, that's nice. That'll contribute to my pension costs and traveling costs and racing costs. But, I'm about the quality aspect out of it and what it's coming from, and also the personalization. And I've got to say, having done a number of AI searches and stuff, I hope I'm right in saying I think that racestronger is the only one that approaches training in this modular fashion, and the only one that could combine it in that kind of time. There are certain plays that do it, but they are just based on AI. You feed in a number of things to AI and it will sort you out a plan. But the first time I used AI, I asked what distances were for a sprint triathlon and I got it wrong. So I am a little bit dubious sometimes about how good it can be.
And I did put in quite a lengthy description of asking it to give me a plan. I did it for a YouTube video, and it came up with, it was generic, but it came up with something not too dissimilar that I would have like followed anyway. So, again, it's what you take out of it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is the future. If you look at Anthropic and you look at Claude and you look at Gemini and stuff, the stuff it produces is amazing. And the next generation is what's called inference. I mean, this is something I do as well. So inference will take your experience, what you put in there, and we'll say, okay, that's the data. I can find data to support this. But what's he really want? Yeah. And the inference chips and the inference architecture that's coming out now will be a step up again. So I expect AI to get much, much better. And the thing is, with the existing AI apps that help you train, will they adopt this expensive architecture, or will they continue to be where they are? But, I would expect in 10 years' time, if you want a pretty decent plan, sadly, you probably won't need a coach. A coach is a different thing. A coach is to motivate, be that person to lean on. And if you're lucky enough to be at a good level where having a coach do one-to-one stuff with you on the track and in the pool and stuff, that's where it's going to be valuable. And I've got to say, I found that out firsthand. I really, really struggled about when I first started, how much should I charge? Because it was 45 too much, is it too little? And then I mentioned Richard Sannard before, charge someone into the hundreds for a one swim lesson. And I thought they've come to him because he's an authority in the field, not just a coach. And I thought, okay, I would want to be thought of as that. And, maybe that's madness in my head, but my charges now reflect the years of ability and stuff I do and the results I expect people to get. And as part of that, for Love Try, I offer every athlete, wherever they're coming from, and sometimes people come over from Australia because they're visiting guests and stuff, they have a 3 or 4 hour assessment that's completely free. They get filmed, they get the biomechanics, they get the one-on-one in the pool, and that's filmed, and they get like a 20-page report on all three. If at the end of that, and it's a chance for me to know them and them to know me, they want to join, they join. If they don't, they've got a pretty decent assessment based on my years of experience and what generally gets passed on by some of the high performance centres. And that's given away for free. And I wouldn't do that. Only once in 20 years have I had a guy take the complete biscuit on that. But otherwise, I just think it's a valuable thing to know what your abilities of your athlete are, what they aspire to, and how you might work. So even then, even though we might be remote in a different country or a different part of the UK, I've still got their files on records. They still know what they can do. I know their potential, and I can put a face to a name and a personality to that. And I think that's invaluable.
Yeah, and vice versa. I think it works both ways, doesn't it? The actual athlete has that connection because you've already connected and at that one-to-one, haven't you? And you've got.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess it's getting them to buy in, isn't it? Really, what your abilities are, rather than somebody on the internet or whatever that you've never met.
yeah, I mean, I've been lucky over the years. I've got a PDF document with 200 or 300 really nice comments on, and people want to see that, they can see it. I'm not a great fan of going to any of the kind of the Trustpilot and all this stuff, because I know how they can be. Again, that's my kind of business. I know how that can be manipulated on that stuff. But at the end of it, I think you've got to have a happy athlete. You've got to give them something that motivates them. They've got to want to do it, even for the boring long runs. There's got to be something in there. So, for instance, on our training, we have wrap and fills taken from fast food, where you might do the majority of a slow run at a particular pace, but then you'll do something interesting in the middle. It might be hill reps, it might be intervals, but they're all down to your relevant racing ability and specificity. So I've been on the poor end of a training program where it was just so goddamn boring that I had a real problem motivating myself to get up. And although sometimes that they're quite challenging, a long run's a long run's a long run. And the big challenge for me especially is doing ultra runners, because that's all about time on your feet. And at the end of the day, if you've got to go out and do 7 hours of a run to prepare for a 100-mile, ultra marathon, it's quite tricky. But then I was introduced to a brilliant guy who said, "Well, make it interesting. Have them go to work with all the windows open in the car. Have them do a run with lots of clothes on. Have them do a run with no clothes on. Have them do a run when they haven't gone for a wee. So they're actually done." And I thought, what for? And he said, so they can get used to being uncomfortable, because you bet your bottom dollar, if you're going to do the Ring of Fire or you're going to do one of the big US landmark races, they're going to be uncomfortable. And this will help them on race day. And I thought, there's more than one way to be creative in the training plan. It's a real lesson for me to see that.
Yeah.
Interesting view.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, incredible. Well, listen, thank you for sharing everything today. Much appreciated. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or bring up, or before we go to the last 5 questions?
No, it's just if you do see me on a triathlon course, I know it's politically incorrect these days, but please don't smack my bottom as you run past me. I have one kind of last story about racing, and I remember turning up, probably like you do. You always wonder, should I turn up on a local race in my GB kit, or do I just race the championship in it? And of course, the common advice is go and do one race before wearing it. And I remember wearing my GB kit, being passed by a female in a rhinoceros outfit on this kind of race. And I thought, I cannot run in behind her with my GB kit on. So I just took it off and DNF'd myself. and it turned out to be Liz Yelling, the Commonwealth 5K champion. And if I'd known that, I might not have done it. But there's all kinds of stories and stuff around that. Yeah. Right, 5 Brilliant. Questions then.
So these are usually the staple questions, and I've tried to change them around a little bit for you. But the first one, as always, is what's your favourite bit of kit?
Bike.
What bike have you got?
I was lucky to be given Canyon bikes, and I guess when they started, I was very fortunate to have a choice, and I was given a couple of team bikes. One interesting thing was I feel weights in the actual components of the bike, which is quite an interesting thing. And then I got a BMC, and since then I've also managed to get into. So I'll qualify that. It would have been Canyon. It's now a BMC electric bike that looks like a regular bike and flies. And of course, after 24 kph, it's all down to you anyway, not the motor.
What one bit of advice, and I'm going to go as a coach now, would you give as a coach? What's the top piece of advice?
Be realistic about your expectations and start to regard down days and down weeks as fundamentally important, because that's when you get fitter.
Yeah, that is so important. And as I've got older, I've appreciated that more and more. But I don't know whether it's an age thing that you just get that wisdom as you get older. And I take a day off every week. Wednesday's my day off, regardless. And rest and sleep and everything else, it's just become all part of it. And that's a great piece of advice. What's your coaching philosophy?
Always leave an athlete knowing more about their discipline or sport than when you came with them, and always use their preferred way of explaining that. I think if you're not capable of demonstrating, showing, and asking for understanding, then you're probably missing your mark as a coach. So I would say pretty much any athlete that uses me, when they leave, in fact, I can put it in a nutshell. I don't know why athletes would want to be with me being coached longer than 4 months, because if they've been listening and I've been doing it right, they will know everything that they need to know to be a really self-coached athlete. I think the coach should be almost self-liquidating, personally. Yeah. I have lots of athletes that keep coming to me because they can't be bothered putting things together, but I think that's it. Self-liquidating your coach should be your aim.
What does a week of training look like for you at the moment? Are you doing any training? I know you said you'd like to get back into aquabike. Are you doing anything at all?
A week of training for me right now with this weather looks like the occasional ride out with my partner who's an age grouper, probably a bit like you. Hopefully swimming a couple of times, although probably I enjoy actually coaching more than I do the swimming, and probably playing tennis. In about 2 or 3 months' time, I will make my mind up whether I'm going to give it a good go again this year or not. Yeah. And that combined with the gym just about takes my time up. I've been pretty much full-time on racestronger the last 2 years. So my normal time for me stepping out the door, I've not listened to my own advice, and I've probably stayed longer doing one thing I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it becomes when you've got something like that project, becomes all encompassing, doesn't it? And that's it. So
the passion, yeah.
Yeah. And finally, what are your short and long-term goals? What do you want to achieve?
I'm very aware that someone's just walked in and they want to go to France right now, but I would love to have a place overseas where training was easy, the sea was 10 minutes away, there'll be a good pool. So my long-term aim would be to be in an environment where training doesn't feel like training, it's just a way of life. And my short-term goal this year would be to get back to being decent on a bike and in the swim, and maybe doing a couple of races. No matter the outcome, that would be very pleasing for me.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you ever so much. It's been great to chat to you. I've learned quite a lot, as I always do on these podcasts. Just thanks for coming on.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's wonderful.
So thanks to Paul once again. Much appreciated for coming on and sharing his journey. And thank you for tuning in. And if you're ready to take your performance to the next level, you can find more information at racestronger.com or follow Paul's latest race updates on Training Peaks. He's also on Instagram, and we'll put all the details in the show notes. And if you'd like to do what Paul's just done and share your journey on this podcast and inspire others, please do get in touch. We're always looking for guests. And you can email us at the Age Group Multisport Podcast at gmail.com. We're on Instagram at amp_podcast. We're on Facebook at Richard Joseph Conway. And we're on YouTube at ampgb. So please do get in touch. And that's it for this episode. So don't forget, stay safe, keep training, and love that process.
Podcast.